Good evening. I'm Teresa Skubic, and this is Forum Daily for Thursday, May 29th. Prime Minister Mark Carney made his debut in the House of Commons for his first question period as a member of Parliament. Conservative House Leader Andrew Scheer welcomed him to the House before launching into a question about Canada's response to U.S. tariffs.
I would like to welcome the Prime Minister to his first official question period. This is where democracy lives, and this is where we provide rigorous scrutiny on every word he says and every dollar he spends on behalf of Canadians. Now, let's talk about those words and dollars. During the election campaign, it was elbows up as he put retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. Then secretly, he dropped those tariffs to effectively zero. But he didn't stop there. He told Canadians that the government would collect $20 billion in revenue from those tariffs and use it to cost his platform. Now that those tariffs are going to bring in $0, two quick questions. Why wasn't he honest with Canadians during the election? And how's he going to make up the shortfall? Is he going to borrow it, print it, or tax it?
Mr. Speaker, may I first thank my constituents from Nepean for giving me the honour of being here. Could you also indulge me to say how great it is to see you in the Speaker's chair, and I trust that you're operating under the period of grace that will not be accorded to me. Appropriately, as the Leader of the Opposition just said. Mr. Speaker, our tariffs have maximum impact on the United States, minimum impact on Canada, and we are dedicating all the revenues from those tariffs to supporting the workers and businesses affected by the unjustified American actions.
Hear, hear.
Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet also went after Mr. Carney over tariffs, pointing out that Tuesday's throne speech made no mention of tariffs or trade.
Mr. Speaker, the topic that set off this election campaign and the entire basis of the Liberal strategy was the trade and tariff and even the annexation crisis that we've been seeing with Donald Trump. But despite this, yesterday's throne speech, read by a foreign monarch, did not mention trade. It did not mention tariffs. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm wondering how it is that this terrible crisis that got our Prime Minister elected, how did it just get forgotten in the throne speech?
Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre said that his party will support proposed Liberal tax cuts, but urged to make those steeper cuts.
Now, I'll just take a very brief trip down memory lane, not to go too far back, but of course, we Conservatives have been leading a crusade for lower taxes, to axe the carbon tax and the GST off new homes, to cut income taxes. And of course, when we proposed this, the Liberals said we were crazy, and now all of a sudden they are, at least in part, plagiarizing our policy proposals and adopting modified and watered down versions of them. Their motion will partly eliminate the carbon tax, the GST off homes, and give a very modest, very tiny income tax cut, so tiny that it would be barely enough to buy you a cup of coffee every week at a Starbucks. But it's better than nothing. Conservatives came here to fight for lower taxes and more purchasing power, and so we are going to put forward amendments to this motion that will get rid of the entire carbon tax for everyone, for real, for good. We also push for the GST to come off of more homes so that we can encourage more building and more buying. And we'll push for a bigger income tax cut that people will actually notice, so that hard work really does pay off for a change. We are the party of taxpayers. We will vote for every tax cut, always and everywhere. We love taxpayers, and we want taxpayers to be better off. We will offer even better ideas in the future, and as I said a few weeks ago, I'm encouraging the Liberals to steal my ideas, because we have the best ideas.
His comments came just ahead of the first question period of this parliamentary session. Mr. Poilievre, who lost his seat during the last election, had to watch the proceedings from outside the chamber.
I'd love to be in there. It's a great place. I love the House of Commons. I love the excitement and the thrill. And I've never really been a spectator of the House. So but I'm going to work hard to earn the opportunity to do it again. I consider it a great privilege that I've been able to do it for so long in the past, and I think the opposition has a great role to hold the most powerful people in the country accountable through question period.
Manitoba has declared a province-wide state of emergency as wildfires continue to threaten communities across the province. An emergency alert issued Wednesday said that the measures were due to rapidly spreading wildfires and extreme fire conditions in northern and eastern Manitoba.
The Manitoba government has declared a province-wide state of emergency due to the wildfire situation. This is a significant step we are taking to uphold our obligation to keep people safe. We're talking about roughly 17,000 people that we are looking to provide safety to and to prevent the loss of life. The wildfires in northern Manitoba have intensified since we gave our update this morning. Wildfire and emergency management officials have now been advised that evacuation orders have been issued for the city of Flin Flon, the communities of Pimichigamak Cree Nation, Puckatawagan Cree Nation, and the Northern Affairs community of Cross Lake. All told, we're looking at about 17,000 people in northern communities that are being evacuated from their homes over the next few hours. The majority of these folks will be coming to Winnipeg. This is the largest evacuation Manitoba will have seen in most people's living memory. For that reason, our government has triggered a province-wide state of emergency to allow us to respond to this crisis. It will provide provincial officials the ability to safely transport evacuees and to provide shelter for them. The main purpose of this announcement and the declaration of the province-wide state of emergency is that local leaders in several northern communities, both in cities like Flin Flon, but also in First Nations, have made the call that their folks need to leave their homes so that we can keep you safe. And as a result, in order to step up and to be that coordinating force so that people can get out safely, we've called on the federal government to send the Canadian Armed Forces. They are doing so. And we as the province are going to set up places for everyone to stay.
During a news conference, Alberta MP Heather McPherson stood in solidarity with doctors who have just returned from Gaza.
This is the defining moral issue of our time. As you know, New Democrats have long called on the Canadian government to end its complicity in this genocide. The time for statements is over. Long past time for action. Strong political and moral choices that will put pressure on Netanyahu to end this. We demand an arms embargo, sanctions on Netanyahu and his cabinet, and the immediate recognition of the State of Palestine in order to move forward with a political solution that could save millions of lives and end this horror. Today, I'm proud to announce that I have reintroduced my motion to recognize the State of Palestine on the order paper. And I'm encouraging my colleagues in the Commons to co-sponsor this motion. No matter what party you are from, now is the time to raise your voice. Now is the time to put pressure on Prime Minister Mark Carney to do the right thing.
One of the leaders of Doctors Against Genocide recently testified about the harsh conditions currently affecting the people of Gaza.
The tens of thousands killed are only the visible casualties. The real crime lives on in the children who now see and associate sunlight with drones. Mothers, so malnourished, they birthed generations of already starved babies, their tiny, deformed bodies by famine weapons, their organs pre-aged by trauma. And now we are witnessing starvation weaponized with surgical precision, walking 15 kilometers through danger zones. This is what it looks like. To queue for a single food parcel, only to be detained or bombed at the so-called distribution points. This is a sick theater where Israeli forces starve Palestinians to perform their dehumanization for the world cameras to see, while deliberately blocking UN-regulated systems that could actually deliver food and feed people.
The doctors also allege that Canadian firms are still making military components being used in Gaza. A Minnesota judge has sentenced a man to 10 years in prison for human smuggling in a case of a family that froze to death near the border. The judge also sentenced the man's co-accused to 6.5 years behind bars for his role in the case. A couple from India and their 2 young children were sent walking across the border in an overnight blizzard before their bodies were later found in a field. U.S. President Donald Trump has hit a major legal barrier for his plan to realign global trade. A U.S. federal court has blocked both the sweeping Liberation Day tariffs and the fentanyl-related duties against Canada and Mexico. Its decision says Trump does not have the authority to wield tariffs on nearly every country through the use of the International Economic Emergency Powers Act of 1977. The Trump administration is expected to appeal, and this morning during question period, Mark Carney made mention of the court's decision.
Mr. Speaker, the government welcomes yesterday's decision by the U.S. Court of International Trade, which is consistent with Canada's long-standing position that the U.S. IEEPA tariffs were unlawful as well as unjustified. That said, we recognize that our trading relationship with the United States is still profoundly and adversely threatened and affected by similarly unjustified 232 tariffs against steel, aluminum, and the auto sector, as well as continuing threats of tariffs against other strategic sectors, including lumber, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals.
The Quebec legislature has passed a bill requiring immigrants to embrace the common culture of the province. Secularism and protection of the French language are some of the shared values that newcomers would need to adhere to. The province can use the new law to withhold funding for groups and events that don't promote Quebec's common culture. Critics have said that the legislation is an attempt to integrate newcomers and could stoke anti-immigrant sentiment. The National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations says she doesn't blame First Nation leaders who are voicing frustration with governments promising to fast-track development in their territories in the name of national unity. National Chief Sidney Woodhouse-Nepinak says that when Indigenous leaders are not at the table making decisions from the start, it causes the federal government more problems later. The chief was asked by a reporter from the Canadian Press if she was already witnessing a shift in the government's policies towards First Nations when compared to the Trudeau era.
Well, first of all, I want to thank the throne speech yesterday. I think it was a chapter changing when we had free, prior, and informed consent for the first time in the history of this country, have that mentioned in a throne speech. And there was a lot of reference to Indigenous people in there. I want to take that as a positive and give them the benefit of the doubt. I know sometimes I've been through transition. I know sometimes during transition periods things have been chaotic, and they have been. I mean, I went to the I've done a few things with them right before the election that was really difficult without a government there. So I'm glad that they're there, and I hope that they come together quickly, and there's always room for improvement. And we'll be there to tell them and remind them when they're shorting First Nations in any way. Is there a change? I'm sure there's obviously going to be a change, I think, from one government to the next. But I think, I've spent some time with Prime Minister Carney last weekend, all long weekend. And, we had deep discussions on many of these issues. And we do want to make sure that water legislation is, and that those discussions on water, that we begin to work on those very quickly. I also want to make sure, if there's something as a mother and a woman, every time that we have babies, and no other group in the world is legislated the way First Nations are. We're the only group around the entire world that is legislated. And every time I have a baby, that the government wants to know if my child's eligible to be First Nation. And I think that that's something that we have. There are uncomfortable conversations that need to be had. But the second generation, the government keeps losing in court because they keep discriminating against us. We have a baby and they ask, who's the father? Very intrusive, right? Is your baby First Nation? Very intrusive. And I think that's another discussion that I want to have as a mom and as because you're seeing it, right? They come at First Nations so hard. And I think that we have to have that uncomfortable conversation with Prime Minister Carney. Of course, there's policing, and you're right, the unfinished business of child welfare. So lots of work to do.
She was also asked whether the Prime Minister has signaled an end to the ongoing process of defining free, prior, and informed consent, as had been previously promised.
First of all, I want to uplift the chiefs in Alberta, in BC, in Ontario, and everybody else that's supporting them. Very united. You see First Nations united across the country when our treaty and inherent rights are being trampled on. But I also just want to say that that'll be a point of discussion with my meeting with the Prime Minister in the days ahead. And, we'll be back. We'll come back to you with that. But certainly, absolutely, there's a big question on that we do have to get through with this government. And if they want to do things right, like I said, start with the basics. Make sure that our kids have access to internet, to schools, to homes, to access to food. And poverty shouldn't be administered. And so I know that we have a lot of work to do, but I look forward to meeting with the Prime Minister, and that will be one of the first orders of business.
Defense Minister David McGuinty says that Canada will control its defense spending a day after U.S. President Donald Trump renewed his rhetoric to make the country the 51st state, this time in exchange for protection under a proposed missile defense system.
I learned a long time ago when it comes to managing relationships with other countries, you can only control what you can control. And what we can control here now is decisions around strengthening our sovereignty and our security. We can also control our expenditures. We can control our responsibility to participate directly in NORAD. We've launched a NORAD modernization initiative. We just had an over-the-Arctic announcement by the Prime Minister for $6 billion. Look, we're going to continue to do what's right for Canadians. And that includes making sure that we are secure, that we are sovereign. And we're going to continue to manage our relationship with not just the United States, but as we heard the Prime Minister say yesterday, with the European Union, because there's a very, very interesting economic opportunity for Canada as well as Europe rearms.
A judge has approved a $500 million settlement in a class action lawsuit that accused Loblaw Companies and its parent company, George Weston, of engaging in a bread fixing scheme. Ontario Judge Ed Morgan called the settlement fair and in the best interest of class members. Records show that 78% of the settlement funds will be allocated to residents in Canada outside Quebec, and more than 20% will wind up with people in that province. Those eligible for a piece of the money had to have bought packaged bread for personal use or for resale between January 2001 and December of 2021. Dr. Sylvain Charlebois has more on the specifics of this settlement.
Well, it's been a long time. The investigation started back in 2015, and since then we've seen some progress made by participants, mainly Loblaw. They came forward in 2015, received immunity, and was able to participate in this investigation. In 2017, of course, when an apology was made public, Loblaw did offer gift certificates to all Canadians. Only 3.8 million Canadians actually did apply to get a $25 gift card, which totals about $96 million. But many people felt it wasn't enough. So there were class action lawsuits in Ontario mainly, and they're now we're learning that there was a settlement earlier in the month. Basically asking both Loblaw and George Weston, the bakery, to basically pay out $404 million. And both sums would equal to about $500 million. So basically, you're seeing two main players of the bread price fixing scheme pay out $500 million essentially. But some estimates actually suggest that this bread price fixing scheme, which lasted 14 years from 2001 to 2015, before Loblaw disclosed to the Competition Bureau that scheme costs Canadians over $5 billion. So $500 million may seem like a lot of money, but it doesn't really, it's not the same sum as what the scheme actually costs Canadians.
We also spoke to Dr. Charlebois about what this settlement means for Canadian consumers.
Well, we don't know exactly how this money is going to be dispersed. If you actually look at the number of adults in Canada, considering the amount, we're looking at about $13 on average per adult. I'm not exactly sure that's going to be the amount, but my guess is that there'll be something similar to what we saw back in 2017 when people were asked to apply to get a gift certificate. And in return, of course, you had to also give Loblaw personal information, which made a lot of people feel uncomfortable. That's probably why some people didn't apply. So we'll see how it goes this time around. Maybe parameters and conditions will be a little bit different.
A hovercraft company that claims it can transport passengers from Toronto to the Niagara region in 30 minutes has announced that it's closer to launch after cruising past a key milestone. Hoverlink Ontario Incorporated says following 3 years of consultation, it's finalized an agreement to secure a landing in the western gap of the Toronto Harbour. Hoverlink says it could make as many as 48 trips daily, which it estimates would result in 8,000 fewer cars a day on the QEW when running at full capacity. Currently, the 120-kilometer trip from Toronto to the Niagara region takes more than an hour and a half by car without traffic. Joining me now in studio is Chris Morgan, CEO of the Hoverlink Ontario Incorporated. Chris, thank you so much for the time today.
Pleasure being here. Thanks for your time.
Now, I want to start first off with congratulating you on this amazing milestone. This is exciting.
Yeah, it makes it a little bit more real. I think only having one location, like I said earlier, it's just it's like a ride. We have enough of those. So we've got to get people A to B and B to A and do it 365 days a year.
So what inspired you and your team to come up with this Hoverlink idea?
I started as a kind of the sole person playing with these ideas. It was we were in a little pub in a little town called Hopwis in England. I'm a firstborn Canadian in our family of British immigrants. So every summer I went over to England and I learned about hovercrafts all the time. It was just normal there. And then when they were saying to me, Uncle Chris, could you design and look at the ways that hovercrafts could help in Canada and what would they do? So I just took it upon myself to say, okay, I'll just start researching it. And that was, the first week of November 2011. And then it just kind of grew. I was a pessimist at first, and then it started making sense. And my R&D mind said it shouldn't make sense. There's failed attempts. And it kind of grew. And then working with a number of folks around the world over the years, I leaned on them and said, can you give me your perspective? And let's try and punch holes in this thing. It's a constant R&D approach. So I think that's how it started. Yeah, it was nothing.
And can you walk us through how the technology works and how Hoverlink is able to reduce the commute time down to 30 minutes?
I think ultimately you're not going to get comfortable with commuters and people who want to travel between the two destinations unless you offer 12 months of the year. So then understanding, that technology, there's one or two crafts that can go over ice, land, water comfortably at high speeds. And the technology is basically a hovercraft and how it works and how we manage it. So being from Britain, where Christopher Cockerell was the inventor of it in 1955, and again, they had a number of 5 or 6 companies over the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and it was just a normal, passage of moving people to the continent. And so I just grew up with it, and I said, okay, let's have a look at it. And I explained to people, it's almost like a air hockey puck. We're Canadian, we play air hockey. So it's really like that. Instead of the air blowing up, the air blows down from the craft, and they hold it inside its skirt, and she just moves along. So then that's really it.
Now, traffic is a major issue in the GTA, and you laugh because it is true and it is relatable.
It's growing everywhere. I spent some time in California and watched it. You build more highways, they're just going to fill them up.
Well, with this Hoverlink, what are the environmental impacts, but as well, what are the traffic impacts going to be with this idea that you've created?
Well, it's a team that did it. It's collectively a lot of folks that hopped on this journey with me. So I think the big piece is understanding how you manage that process and help people get through to movement on water in Ontario. And I think ultimately it's just trying to understand the go-to-market strategy. So did I answer that exactly the way you want me to answer it? Give me a little bit more and I'll drill
are there
deeper.
promotional steps that you and your team are going to be taking to encourage commuters to switch from using the Hoverlink opposed to driving their cars?
I think when they look at the green environment that we're all globally responsible for, they're going to say, let's get you out of your car. Let's get your time back. If it's a 3-hour journey into Toronto, that's a lengthy time. And so if we can carve that down to half an hour, and you start looking at that, I'm going, what am I spending in time? What's my time worth? I mean, COVID taught us that.
Right.
That maybe family time and some self-importance to say, I want to work, but I want to work to live, not live to work. And so how do we manage that? So I think that's really important for people, and moving in a way like the craft makes no wake or wash. She now with these new engines, these new Rolls-Royce engines, we're using biodiesel 100, and there's rumors that methanol will come soon, and then the only thing that's coming out of those exhausts is moisture, like water. So I think it's that making no wake or wash, safe on the environment, which is important, for species and marine life, flora, fauna. Particularly in BC, we've been out in BC a lot looking, and they're very in touch with nature, and I think understanding that we're not doing damage and not making wakes and shoreline protection issues, and even sound. It took a number of years to get the propeller systems and the prop ducts, the way the designers have done it, to be very quiet. So I think it's just how do you make hovercrafts play nicely with urban centers was the task. And over the years, the predecessors are mostly for military and Coast Guard. So they don't care about fuel and sound. They just want to get the job done.
Right. And will this be a year-round method of transportation?
Yes.
Or so not just seasonal? Because I think a lot of people, when they hear of Hoverlinks, they're thinking this is just going to be a summer thing.
No, the whole premise for how we landed on hovercrafts was we talked about technology, but that might be the only technology that can connect the North Shore and South Shore together 12 months of the year, because you still get ice that comes through Niagara Falls and down and out. And most vessels can't go high speed that aren't above the ground. So she hovers about a meter above the ground. When you see her, she's got a skirt, but she's actually not touching. And it's pretty exciting when you say, okay, now we can connect you 12 months of the year. Now it makes sense that you could work in Toronto and live here, and vice versa. You could live in Toronto, go to school here, or visit here, and understanding its capacity and speed and time. So yeah, we're pretty excited. It's something that, I went to Ottawa and I met with a number of MPs, and I think 67 of them in 3 days. And they said, my goodness, what else can you do with this? And I said, well, I think it's just understanding the technology. And every decade, whether Christopher Cockerell's like, Henry Ford or the Wright brothers, he invented it, but necessity bears out innovation. Well, we didn't have any necessity to change it because we started loving our automobiles, going in tunnels and doing different things. For us now, it's the necessity is we've got to move around in a different way. We need to start using the water again, which, you look 150 years ago, First Nations, how did we all trade with them on the waterways? So we need to look at that and say, let's give this a 21st century upgrade and all the latest, greatest technologies, put that together, and that's the next generation of hovercrafts. And
how big is this hovercraft? And ideally, how many people will it be able to commute?
So we played around with different volumes of passengers, and so the one we land on, she's 180 passenger capacity. You can bring your bicycles on. They're wheelchair friendly. I spent a lot of time. My mom worked at Blue River Children's Hospital for years, so I grew up with March to Dimes and helping out where you can. And I think that's a big part of it. And imagine you can take your bicycle to Toronto, and you just take it off the rack and off you go, just like a bus. That was foreign 20 years ago to say, oh, I can put my bicycle on the bus. So I think that's where we are. And if each craft is destined for a maximum of 12 trips over and 12 trips back, each one's done 24 in a day. There may be some parts of the season where you go slower because there's less traffic in the winter until we build that economic growth and activity in the winter. So yeah, it's just, it's doing those numbers and working through it and seeing what makes sense.
And what are some of the major hurdles before becoming operational? And is there a realistic timeline for when it's going to be up and running?
I think there are a number of hurdles. We are shovel ready here in Niagara. We have 18 acres of greenfield. That took 3 years of processes. And again, we're on federal land. So, we are, expected to do many levels. And I think, like even for instance, the Department of Fisheries Oceans, we can't go in and disturb the water surface between the 1st of March and the end of June because we need to respect the spring spawn. So we don't go in to do that right yet. So I'm kind of locked out of doing anything. And I need to go into the water first to do the slope because the craft in St. Catharines will come up on land and go into her hangars or the terminal. Then you get into the Migratory Bird Impact Assessment Act. So again, protecting species at risk and so on. So they don't want you really moving grass and shrubs and trees and things until between the 1st of May and the end of August. So we need to kind of be mindful of that too. And then, so it's kind of a all go, September, October, November to get some infrastructure in that isn't going to impact wildlife in any manner. And then you start to build. So it's about 18 to 24 months worth of work, but we got some workarounds. So if we can pick up speed, great. A lot of our structures are prefab. So they're being built. So it's ready to launch. Put it and build it and get it ready. So I think that's it. And the craft takes considerable time to build. I call it T squared, Mr. Trump and his tariffs. It's changed where we might get the craft assembled. So we're just looking through that right now and seeing what's available in Europe to construct them for us, or maybe even here. Maybe we can step up and dust off our sleeves and say, let's get them here, because eventually we like to assemble them here all the time. We need to be a little bit more self-reliant in this country, and maybe this is just one reason to show we need to lead rather than follow. So something my grandfather said, you're either a leader, a follower, or those who are told to kindly get out of the way.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for the time today. I really appreciate it. And again, congratulations. This is an amazing accomplishment.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, don't go anywhere. Coming up after the break, we'll have more of today's top national and international headlines. Forum Daily News will be right back after this. The Ottawa Police Service say that 13 people have been arrested following protests outside the CanSec Convention and police headquarters. The annual Military and Defense Industry Conference in Ottawa drew protesters Wednesday morning, opposed to the ongoing Israeli offensive in Gaza. Protesters from groups including the Palestinian Youth Movement, Labor for Palestine Ottawa, and others blocked Uplands Drive outside the centre. Protesters were demanding the federal government immediately halt all arms exports to Israel and cancel all planned arms imports.
Free the people, free them all! Free the people, free them all! Break the chains and let them fall! Break the chains and let them fall! Viva, viva Palestina! Viva, viva Palestina! Viva, viva Palestina! Viva, viva Palestina! Viva, viva Antifa!
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum says she hasn't decided if she'll accept the invitation to go to the G7 Leaders Summit next month in Alberta. U.S. tariffs are expected to be a major topic at the summit, and Donald Trump is expected to attend. Canada was supposed to host both presidents last year for the Northern Leaders Summit, but Liberals said that the elections in both countries made it a challenge. Tech billionaire Elon Musk, who was granted special government employee status to lead the Department of Government Efficiency, announced Wednesday evening that his time in the Trump administration has come to an end. His departure closes a turbulent chapter marked by thousands of layoffs, the dismantling of government agencies, and ongoing legal battles. The entrepreneur faced significant challenges navigating the complexities of Washington and ultimately achieved far less than he had anticipated. Canadians considering a destination wedding in the U.S. may be facing higher costs. New U.S. tariffs are impacting nearly every aspect of the wedding industry, from cakes and flowers to the wedding attire itself. How much of those increased costs will be passed on to couples depends on the vendors and the numerous middlemen involved in the process. A new poll conducted by Leger has shown that women in Canada support the expansion of Canada's energy sector. We sat down with the CEO of Canada Powered by Women to discuss the poll and their findings.
Canada Powered by Women really focuses on asking women in Canada what their perspectives are around energy and the economy and the environment. And our purpose is to influence energy policy so that it meets the needs of women. And we use public opinion research with our partner Leger that we conduct across the country as a mechanism to ask women what they think about these issues. And we do that that's really proportionate to the population so that we have a truly national footprint. And Leger, who is our research partner, uses their panel and their survey development to go and ask the questions that are related to those topics. And we know that women across the country really make this connection around the economy and a thriving energy sector. So our audience is, we call it engaged women, because they are very in tune with the news, politics, and they're very interested in policy. But more so, they make the connection that if there's a thriving energy sector, there's a thriving economy. So we've been doing this national surveys for a couple years now, 3 years running, and our audience is 42% of women in Canada, which is about 6.7 million strong. So it's an audience that's very important and critical, and we saw that in the federal election. And they really want to have and are having a conversation around energy and the economy. We've been asking women about energy development and resource development for a couple of years. And so what we've seen, though, is especially earlier this year with a lot of uncertainty with the U.S. relationship and tariffs and trade, was that the conversation and the importance of developing and responsibly developing our energy sector, particularly our oil and gas, went through the roof. This idea that we need to have energy independence and we need to be economically independent. And the two are very related, although different as well. So we asked specifically about support for, development, but also for energy corridors and pipelines and export. And what we found that women were really prioritizing developing our resources, but also making sure that we can lower global emissions through the export of our energy. So we asked quite a bit about, what do you think we need to be doing during all this economic uncertainty? And leveraging our energy resources came through loud and clear.
We also spoke about how those polled view major topics like energy independence and pipelines in Canada, and what needs to happen next at the political level.
So one thing that was very interesting was that we asked women about whether or not they know that there isn't a pipeline that goes from coast to coast, so from BC across the country. And it was 67% of women that weren't aware of that. And what happened was, when we asked that question, we certainly share, okay, so there isn't a pipeline like that. And what the response was that 80% of women said, we need to urgently expedite energy corridors. And 90% said we need to have pipelines in those corridors so that we can get our energy from coast to coast. And then also that we need to simplify regulation so that things can get built. And so not only did they support an energy corridor, but they support an energy corridor with pipelines in it. One thing I would note is that across the board in every single province, the idea that oil and gas contributes to our economic prosperity went up 20% in every single province, including Quebec. And we've been asking that question for 3 years. So the level of conversation that's going on nationally about energy is evident from that level of support, and that idea that our resources make Canada prosperous. Also, I would share that 78% of women think that our energy sector can help for Canada to be the best place to live, work, and raise a family. So we also see a theme of pride in our resources. And I think that's really important, because we're talking a lot right now about Canada and elbows up and all these things. And we are rich with resources, and women recognize that and are like, okay, let's get going. Let's get it done. And the other point I would raise for you is that it is not enough for energy policy to align with people's ideas. And what engaged women want is policy that actually executes, like gets things done, and that it delivers on what's important to them. And we know that natural resources, so that goes into the realm of all forms of energy, oil and gas, natural gas, nuclear. It's a recognition that all of the above is needed to meet our needs, and that we could be a global leader in reducing emissions and in technology and innovation in this sector. And so policymakers really need to listen to this, because policy needs to be effective and actually get stuff done. And engaged women are demanding that of government. So it's not enough to just have platitudes and rhetoric in an election. It actually needs to happen. And I think that's really exciting. And we're very optimistic that things are going to start moving, because there's an energy conversation that's happening now that needed to happen for a long time. So perhaps it might have got, escalated by commentary coming out of the US, but that's a good thing, because we needed to be having this conversation years ago.
The Florida Panthers are heading to the Stanley Cup Final after a thrilling win last night in Game 5 of the Eastern Conference Final. In front of a roaring home crowd in Florida, the Cats secured their place on the NHL's biggest stage for the third time in a row.
Svechnikov with it. Back for Kostersberg. He'll shoot. It's over the net. Bounces free at the side of the goal. Taylor Hall up with it. 4 seconds to go. Kostersberg hands it across. Burns a drive. Third time and still a charm. The Florida Panthers are going back to the Stanley Cup Final with a chance to defend their title.
The Panthers will face the winner of the Western Conference Final between Dallas and Edmonton, with the Oilers up 3-1 to put them within one win of a rematch with Florida for the Cup. Astronomers have discovered a strange new object in our Milky Way galaxy. An international team says that it could be a star, a pair of stars, or something else entirely. It says that this celestial object is emitting X-rays around the same time it's shooting out radio waves. What's more interesting is the cycle repeats every 44 minutes, at least during periods of extreme activity. I'm Teresa Skubik, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you can always visit our website at forumdailynews.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on X and TikTok. You can also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. Thanks for joining us on Forum Daily News. We'll see you next time. Good night, Canada.